Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Scott Stedman podcast. Today is a special episode because with me, I have some individuals who have joined me for my deconstruction podcast that I produced last fall of 2021. And we are now back to kind of discuss the podcast, to kind of discuss what things have changed in our lives over the last couple of months, and really just to kind of discuss some questions and some responses that we have gotten from the podcast. So with me, I have Veronica Wylie.
Hi.
I have Phil Van Dyke.
Hello.
And I also have Britta Yeager.
Hello.
Hey guys, well, thank you for being back on the show. I definitely appreciate it. I have to say, I had probably the most fun in all the podcasts I've done and all the hundreds of episodes I've done. Probably the Deconstruction Series has been the most fun I have had doing the podcast because each of your guys' stories were so similar and yet sometimes so unique as well. And it was just so fascinating to hear. And especially, it's funny that I have the four of us in here because I think the one constant thread for all four of us is all of us went to a Christian university, and it was at that Christian university where we started to see some of those cracks and kind of some of those questions were coming. So that's fantastic. So I know, Britta, before we started the show, you said you have not had a chance to listen to anyone's episodes or even the series, so that's okay. But anybody else? It looks like Veronica's like, yep, I didn't do it. Phil, did you get to listen to stuff?
To my credit, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I have an excuse. I'm planning a wedding. So
well, you know what's great?
Honeymoon listening.
You know what's great? Honeymoon listening material. Listening to my voice.
Yep, that will definitely get us in the mood. That's what's going on our wedding night.
Oh no,
Wow.
no, please, no. Oh, I don't know how to respond to that either. I'm shocked or I'm honored. I don't know. But
I mean, you could see if you could slip it into the DJ playlist, during the reception.
I think that would involve coming out to my dad, which would be a mistake.
Oh yeah, no, that is true. That is true. Phil, so going back to you, so you were able to listen to the episodes?
I actually was able to listen to a majority of them.
Okay. So what was your thoughts on hearing people's stories, hearing kind of what were some things that you thought were kind of very similar to your own story and some things that were kind of different from your story?
I mean, I think it was all very similar. There wasn't really too much that was dissimilar because I think that we all just found this discordant note within the church that we, for one reason or another, couldn't reconcile for a period of time. And I think that in our own ways, we've all resolved it somehow. And I mean, I wish I could say that I was shocked, but I mean, for the most part, there's been so much damage done that it's hard to ignore. And I'm glad that we're actually talking about it now.
Yeah, great. And yeah, I mean, I think, just kind of thinking back to all your stories and stuff, there was a lot of stories where, growing up, you either grew up in the church or you grew up in a very strict Christian environment that kind of perpetuated a lot of these things that when you finally were able to kind of get out of that culture or even that subculture, you were able to say, hey, there's some things here that just don't make sense, or there's some things that really strike me odd. I think more specifically, just the Britta, I think it was your episode where you talked about where you had a Sunday school teacher talking about purity and you were like 10 years old. And it's like, why are we having this conversation? To, Veronica talking about, being in Texas and then coming to Indiana and then coming to Anderson, and just a lot of that journey and a lot of those questions you were struggling with too. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of similarities and a lot of hurt that we've all been through. Since the podcast has released, it seems like the whole term of the whole terminology of deconstruction in this movement or this culture has seemed to continue to percolate. So what have you guys experienced since recording your episode? What were some things that you've seen in your own context of this deconstruction movement? Well, okay.
Sorry,
Well, no.
that's a really broad question, and I'm not entirely sure.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
it's
let
both
me
broad
break it
and
down.
deep, so it covers a
So-
lot.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
let me break
exactly. It's like, where do we start?
yeah, so let me break it down. Let me talk about some of the things I've experienced. So obviously, there's a big movement of deconstruction on the TikTok platform. I have seen so many people from people who grew up in very heavily evangelical circles. I've seen people who were ministers or pastors, people who were theologians who kind of are like, hey, here's all this stuff. Even people, I think there's one pastor who goes on there and he tells a story about being a pastor of a church in Oklahoma, and to the point where he literally got to the point where he was ready to take his own life. Like, it got that bad because of a lot of the stuff. And once he was able to kind of have this moment where he was able to kind of, whether it's I forget how he explains it, but he started to think things clearly and just said, it's not worth it, this stuff. And so then he started, and a lot of it was because he was starting to see contradictions between what his denomination and even what his congregation believes and kind of what the scriptures say. And those two worlds were doing this. And he's like speaking on what he felt like was truth from the scriptures. And yet he was getting criticized and even getting, I guess, threats of getting fired because of it. And it was just becoming a very toxic place for him. We've seen people like John Cooper from Skillet, who has condemned this deconstruction movement, saying it's evil. I've seen people who are basically saying that the opposite, deconstruction's healthy and it's a great way to kind of really sort out stuff and try to find out what you truly believe and what are the things you believe within your faith that are essentials and things that you hold true to. And then all the other stuff is just kind of filler, and it's stuff that you kind of throw away. And then I think the most recent one is there's somebody who's in the season of deconstruction and they're kind of like, they feel like they're floating and they're like, okay, when do I get to land? When do I finally get to kind of get through this season? Because I feel like I'm just kind of, floating, and I just want to find a foundation that I can plant yourself on. So those were kind of the things that I've experienced. And it seemed like it was all over the spectrum. Some people who were pushing hard against it, people who are embracing it, and people who are kind of in the middle.
I feel like, I don't know, I kind of feel like deconstruction is not like a new thing, like people, this is a very, I feel like, honestly, I'm not really sure how anybody gets to adulthood having grown up in the church and not experience some form or other of deconstruction, even if it's just a minor one day, do I really believe this kind of thing? I don't know how you could possibly establish exactly what you believe without questioning what you've always been told, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean it, and it's healthy. Like like if you can't sit there and say like, why do I believe the things I do, then you're just following on, the belief system that somebody told you to, and you're not really taking those evaluations for yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how like cults are started, or like that's how genocides happen. That's how, you know what I'm saying? Like the second you stop critically thinking about things is the second you are able to be led into incredibly dangerous situations.
Yeah, and you can bring up a good question, because there was one episode, it was Emily's episode, where she talked about how she felt like that the modern church was very cultish. And there was a I forget what, there's a podcast called Cults where they explore all the different cults, and they really talk about it in two parts. One is how the cult was formed and the leader, and then the people who kind of bought into this cult. And a lot of the similarities were, and a lot of the things they say about cult is you either have a leader, like more of a charismatic, strong leader, and then you have individuals who kind of buy into the product. But then the third thing is that once you buy into the product, you're not allowed to question it. You're not allowed to leave, or even if you have to, and even that, you have to cut yourself off from your family, cut yourself off from any type of literature. And I think that third part is kind of a tricky one, because I don't really think that there's people who are saying, well, don't talk to your family, don't do this, and kind of pull you away from all that. But I think at least in the modern church, what I do see is pastors who basically say, oh, if someone wants to challenge me or challenge the church, or want to, say, hey, why is this bad stuff happening? Then you kind of get excommunicated. You kind of not only get excommunicated, but then the church kind of makes an official statement that, well, Scott left because he's a heretic, or Greg Locke calling people witches, or whatever the case may be. Like, there's certain things. I don't think you've seen that video, Veronica, by the way you react.
No, but I'm very interested in finding out what this is now. Because I actually know some witches. So can we just
So basically to sum it up,
my nephew's a witch. So what are we talking about here?
No. So to sum it up, Greg Locke was calling out 3 women in his church, calling them witches, and gonna like kick them out or do something or expose them or whatnot. And mainly what you see the backstory is because they were calling out the questions of his sexual misconduct towards them. This is also the same pastor who talks about how he's very healthy and he has a healthy marriage, and yet he ended up cheating on his wife with his secretary. And now his new wife was the secretary he had. So
yeah, Greg Locke is a fun character to follow if you don't already.
Yeah, right. You might want to do a case study on him. It's great.
I know, right? Maybe the next time I'm tutoring advanced psychology.
But yeah, so, it's stuff like that where when you look at kind of that idea of a cult, when we think of modern churches, sometimes you have a very charismatic leader, someone who's very gung-ho about things. You buy into a church culture because of, well, I like the guy's preaching, no nonsense preachings really, or maybe he preaches a certain type of, has more of a pseudo political message that fits with my political ideology. Or maybe it's just like, well, hey, this church is growing. It's big. It has all this fancy music, kids program, youth programs, everything. So that's what I want for my family. So I'm going to buy into this, and not knowing that, hey, you're kind of buying into something that may or may not be toxic for you in the long run.
And I think
I've definitely been on.
Oh, sorry.
This is the problem with Zoom.
Go ahead, Veronica, and then Britta, and then Phil, I'll have you weigh in after Britta.
I was just gonna say, I've definitely been in churches where they use the verse about being unequally yoked to be like, you shouldn't have close friends who aren't Christians. You shouldn't date people who aren't Christians. You shouldn't, so I think there's a lot of validity to the idea that the modern church is very cultish.
Mm-hmm.
I think that absolutely falls into that third category you were talking about.
Yeah, I can see that. What about you, Britta?
And I was just going to weigh in that the last example that you gave there was, my experience, and I think we talked about that on my episode, that the church that I left and then began deconstructing, that was really, really similar. It was very super music, like fun music heavy, getting into the worship service with the lights and the loud noises, and just very, very Hillsongy, do I want to compare it to? I mean, and I would say there's a lot of comparisons there. All bad. We'll just go with all bad. It when I left, it was because it really began to feel like a cult. You could not question leadership, or you were asked to step out of the roles that you were in. I know people who did so and were pretty much pushed to leave the church. I know people who didn't and left the church anyway, and they were then cut off communication with everyone else. Nobody reached out to me when I left. I think maybe one or two, and I heard from them once and never again. The only people that I talked to from there are ones who also left, and they had really similar experiences to me. So yeah.
Yeah. Phil?
Yeah. There's really not a lot that's changed, but as I've been thinking about deconstruction since this, I've been thinking about the problem of critical thought at large, not just within the church. And I think that in a very real way, we are experiencing a battle for the soul of the church. I mean, ultimately, I know which side's going to win. But I do know that there's this polarization going on, from people that are deconstructing versus people who are just like not questioning anything, and I think that for me, like, it's really hard to find that balance of people or in people to be like, these are big issues, but like, I'm going to be humble enough to admit when I'm wrong, and being able, and even for me, because I'm terrible at this, because once I think I'm right about something, it's very hard to dissuade me, and how do I love the person next to me who's saying something that I know is completely untrue or against the, God's nature even, so I mean, for me, it's more like I've just been having this inner battle, and I'm lucky that I've found, the church that I found, and I still have a strong faith in that regard. But yeah, like, there's a lot of brokenness going on, and it's really hard to kind of reconcile that and, trying to figure out how to go forward, because I want to be able to bring people into my process of deconstruction and say, like, well, this is why I question this, but, how do we have these conversations when people aren't willing to be able to think critically?
Yeah, and I go back, because actually I was just doing a episode this morning, just kind of something to kind of get ahead of the curve, and we were talking about the topic of biblical inerrancy and the idea of, is when people say, well, I believe the Bible's infallible, is it that you truly believe that, or you believe that your interpretation of the Bible is infallible? And I think
and that's the biggest question.
And even the example, and we brought up examples like, we have 3 different theological views of the end times. Which one's the right one? Depending on if you're, so there's so even just simply that, because everyone has their verses they pull to say, well, I'm a post-millennial, premillennial, or amillennial. And then we kind of talked about the verse that Paul writes that, we should work out all, we should work out we should work out our salvation with fear and trembling. And I think when we look at that in context, everything, we have to work stuff out. There's those moments where we do have to kind of wrestle with things and eventually kind of figure out where we land. There's, we have to figure out that, sometimes we have to be that Job and not only deal with some of the struggles that we're dealing with on the why is this happening to me, but also when people are saying, well, this is happening because you did some sin, and Job's like, no, it's not. Like even Job's like, no, what you're saying is invalid. What you're saying has nothing to do with not only, at least, well, Job didn't have a Bible back then because it's wisdom literature, but but basically what you're saying does not fit with the character of who God is, according to Job's point of view. Yeah. And again, like Britta, you mentioned the whole Hillsong thing. And like, even now, like, I've been seeing posts about this, what is it? Hillsong Uncovered on Discovery Plus. And I've had some people who are watching it and they're just like, man, there's definitely a lot of brokenness, man. There's a lot of cover-ups, man. There was a lot of nepotism that was happening in this church. And it just seems like, we've gotten to a point where, at least in my opinion, we've gotten to a point where, when people say the church, it's not necessarily this thing that we see organically happening in the scriptures. It's not these people who are eating together and worshiping God together and learning together and helping the poor and the widows and the orphans and stuff. It's basically, you come so you can throw your giving into a plate to continue to help build up the salary of the leadership. Or I know, Veronica, when we did your episode, it was like they did capital gains fund just for the rent of the church. And it was like, wait, what? Like just for the rent over there out in Hollywood. And it's like, and I was blown away. Like when you said that, I think that's the one time I was shocked on this entire series was that.
Fun fact, they opened a new location I just found out about.
Oh, okay.
I was in Pasadena over the weekend and I was like, oh, now they're renting out a theater. Like one of those like old time movie theaters.
Funny you mentioned that because I just found out that my old church is doing the opposite. They had 5 campuses. They are now down to 2 or 3. And their one main campus, they are using all of the money that was going towards those other campuses, and they are completely demolishing it and building like a new fancy building now because they need more electronics. And
that's where the money should be going.
Yes.
From a church.
Yeah. And one of the campuses that they closed, I have a theory, but I haven't confirmed it with anyone, so I don't know if I should share. But one of the campuses they closed was the one that I was serving at when I left, which was in a very rundown part of the city with a lot of very needy people. And the original plan was to use that to as outreach to help these people. And there were talks when I was still there of possibly closing the campus because there wasn't any money flowing into it. And I was baffled because I'm like, you're putting it in this area that the people don't have money. You're supposed to be using this as outreach. If anything, you should be using the other campuses to fund it and help these people. And no, we're not getting any money, so we're just going to close it.
Yeah,
so,
it's kind of
profit.
Yeah,
it's kind of a difference between building my kingdom and building the kingdom of God. Like it's just like, wow, that's shocking. Oh my goodness. So Phil, you bring up a good point about critical thought, because one of the questions that I have been asked since this podcast has been aired is the idea of higher education or higher Christian education. And one of the things that have been asked is, well, is it dangerous for kids to go to Bible college because we're filling their heads with nonsense and it's causing them to lose their faith? And my response to that was, well, if the church is actually teaching things correctly, then we probably wouldn't be having a bunch of teenage or like young adults deconstructing their faith, because they're not going like, oh, I'm sitting in a Bible class and I'm learning stuff that I was never taught since the day I was born into the church to the day I graduated high school. So thoughts on that? Is higher Christian education the real problem?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Right. I have thoughts on that.
Okay, Phil, let's hear your thoughts. I'm trying to be serious, guys. I do apologize.
No, yeah. I mean, but the thing is like, you can't make this stuff up. And I know I wish that were actually the case, that people were just making this stuff up to be difficult. But the problem is I think that, okay, so since you guys didn't listen to my episode, I joined the Catholic Church back in 2017. Yeah, because it was the same year I got married. One of the things that the Catholic Church teaches, like especially about vocations, like with the vocation of marriage, like the family life, the home life is the first church. Like before you even take your kids anywhere else, like you should be doing things that you should basically be emulating the church. So something that Michelle and I have done, and we just started just before Advent this last year, we are doing this thing called Catholic All Year, where we get things from, it's a company that helps us figure out how to live liturgically and how to like go with the seasons of the church, learning about saints, learning about things that happened in scripture, and stuff like that, and being able to incorporate those into like feast days and activities. I mean, my daughter's 3 years old, so like one of the things that we've been doing is we've been doing Stations of the Cross, and it came with these beautiful cards of all 14 stations. And if you're not familiar with that, it's essentially something we do on Fridays during Lent, where we go through all of the stages of Jesus' crucifixion before we get to the Easter season, as a way to have penitential hearts before we like renew our baptismal vows at the Easter vigil. So like, is higher education the problem, or are our parents and the people around us the problem? Because I think that, and I mean, my parents were great parents, and like, it's because of them that I still believe in something, and it's because of them that I found the Catholic Church, even though my mom would probably be appalled to hear me say that, but if you can't sit back and say, wait a second, like, what does this really mean? And like, why, and like, the other thing is like, why are we just going to church on Sundays? This happens with Catholics too. Like, I mean, even I'm in the minority with this liturgical living, like they go to church on Sunday, they celebrate the Eucharist, some of them send their kids to Catholic schools, which aren't really much better than public schools in regards to religious formation, and then they expect that to be the whole hang on, oh sorry, my daughter almost came in from her bath, sorry about that. That would have been really funny for you all, but
we would have edited that out. It would have been okay.
I'm sure
no video, right? Because I didn't put makeup on, so
no, you're fine.
And luckily this is audio only, so
yeah.
I'll do audio.
So, but yeah, like we expect kids to go to church, like when I was in the Protestant church, Wednesdays and Sundays. That's all I did. Like, I didn't really have a prayer life outside of that. I didn't really read my Bible. It wasn't until I became a Catholic, believe it or not, that I actually read the whole Bible, and not just the Protestant Bible, like the Catholic Bible, which is bigger.
Yeah.
And that's not to put anybody down specifically, but like, it's just this problem that we have, that like, we're in this like culture that says, everything is permissible, even in church, and we don't take time to really like reflect on the things that we're doing, or we don't really take the time to work out our faith with fear and trembling. And I think until families can come together and start saying, no, we're going to live intentionally, we're going to live what we believe, like, of course kids are good. Like, that happens to kids that don't even go to church. Like, they'll go and they'll find out about critical race theory. Oh my gosh, like, it's not the devil to learn something new. It's not evil to question things. The evil thing is to like completely disregard other points of view. And I think, at least in some respect, some colleges are still doing the good work of helping people question what they already believe. And I think it's very much needed.
Yeah, and I would say that, like, two thoughts, Phil. Like, it's so fascinating when people talk about discipleship and just the topic of discipleship, and they think, well, discipleship is the responsibility of the Sunday school teacher, of the youth pastor, and the pastor that we see on Sunday or Wednesday. And that's the only time discipleship happens. And it's like, well, you as a parent, like, I'm with my kids, even when they go to school, I have at least 4 to 5 hours with my kids before they go to bed. When I take my kids to church, they have 1 hour. So who can do better discipleship? The Sunday school teacher for that hour, or the mom and dad who can do it 4 or 5 hours each day, or even just do 4 or 5 hours one day, can be the difference. And then the thing about higher education, I agree with you, because even when I think about my time at Anderson, or even our time at Anderson, I mean, sitting in Introduction to Bible and hearing about, and even I think I remember Dr. Burnett saying, hey, the KJV says Mary was a young girl and the NIV says it's a virgin. And just that simple question, okay, is she a young girl? Is she a virgin? And how that question alone threw so many people in a loop that a lot of people not only dropped the class, but they ended up leaving Anderson because Anderson wasn't Christian enough. And I thought, and for me, I saw it as a way of like, okay, I never thought of this before. Let me think about it. Let me explore it. Let me study it. And then I will draw my own conclusion on if I believe if, Mary was a virgin or not. Or if, and I think it's that sort of thing where, like you say, it's when you have a new idea presented, you could either reject it or you can go, okay, let me critically think about this. Let me explore it. Let me try to understand it. It's the same thing with people. If I'm dealing with somebody like here in the South, I mean, the whole taking down the Confederate monuments and Black Lives Matter, like huge, like oil and water situations about that. And yet sometimes there's a part of me that goes, well, I may not understand the whole BLM thing. So I'm going to find out about it. And then once I find out about it, it's like, okay, it's not as bad as everyone's making out to be. And then the people who are like, oh, don't take down our monuments, I've talked to them and try to understand their point of view. And it's like, okay, I understand why they're getting upset by that. If I was still living in Ohio, I think it's weird. I'm living in the South. I go, I understand it. Do I agree with some of the stuff their justification for having these monuments up? Absolutely not. But at least I'm able to understand them better and be able to have good conversations with them and even help them think about the other side of the story to that and not see things through their own lens. So that's so when it comes to the whole higher education, what, Veronica, do you think higher education's a problem?
No. I don't know. I had like kind of the opposite experience, I think, from you, Phil, because it was an everyday thing for me. I mean, I literally lived in that freaking church. Like the only day I didn't go into that building was Saturday. And even then, sometimes I did. So I don't, it wasn't just a like, oh, Sunday morning and Wednesday evening thing for us. And I do think for me, at least, like my parents, they did their best, to model, and they still do their best to model what they believe. But I think another aspect to it is when the parent, like, there's just so much that isn't taught. You know what I'm saying? Like many people are so ignorant about so many aspects of not just, Christianity and the Bible, but like all religions, right? Like we don't, I think it's important to educate, like Scott was saying, educate ourselves about the other points of view. Why do Hindus believe what they believe? Why do, followers of Islam believe what they believe, or followers of Shinto believe what they believe, right? And I think like higher education opens us up to those points of view, whereas we wouldn't have necessarily gotten them otherwise. I think for me, what did it was being cloistered in that kind of society where all my friends, I use the word friends very loosely, all the people I knew basically were involved in that church. And when I finally did become, exposed to like the outside world, and found out that was what did it for me, was like, hold on, there's this whole other, not just one other like set of beliefs, but like millions of other sets of beliefs. I don't know where I was going with that, except
No, I mean,
I think the church needs to do a better job of educating its people. And you know, then when you find out, oh no, Moses didn't write the first 5 books of the Bible, they were actually written thousands of years later. It doesn't like go, you know, to your entire life.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting thing. And I think kind of the idea of, I mean, even sometimes, even as a pastor, I've gotten flack because I'll kind of say, hey, like, especially when I was doing a Bible study of Genesis, I was saying, hey, here's an old earth view and here's a young earth view. And here's kind of the pros and cons of both views. And you guys have to figure out what you believe. And I think there was some point where people are like, well, no, pastor, you got to tell us what we need to believe. And I'm thinking that's a lot of
really dangerous perspective to have.
That's a very dangerous perspective. And sometimes there's been times where I've had arguments
on you. You know, it's weight and pressure on you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of pressure on me because now someone else's faith view, someone else's view of how they see Jesus or how they see salvation, grace and mercy, sin, forgiveness, like all these big theological terms that kind of help shape our faith. Like that's solely not based on the scripture. That's not solely based on God and Jesus and their character. That's only based on me and if I'm actually reading this book correctly and if I'm interpreting it correctly.
It's also like leaving themselves with the responsibility of the whole thing, right? Like, oh, I don't want to take care of my soul. You do it for me.
And that's dangerous because I can't get you into heaven. I have no power to get you into heaven. I didn't die for your sins. So, yeah, Britta, higher education, good or bad?
I feel like I had a very similar situation to Veronica. You know, we lived in what we so lovingly called the Malone bubble, because it was very much like that. We lived in a bubble. We went to our individual services on Sunday morning, sometimes Sunday night. We had chapel 2 to 3 times weekly. We had mandatory Bible classes that we had to take. We often participated in weekly like Bible studies at the churches we attended. We had floor Bible studies. I mean, it was just constant bombardment of biblical literature and reading that, and at the same time, it was while I was basically being force fed all of this, that was still the moments when I started questioning the most, because I was reading it and going, well, hold on, wait a minute. I don't know that I agree with this. And, then you're met with, well, that's a sin to disagree with it. And for me, it didn't feel like it. And yeah, I mean, like you're being given all of this material that the religious higher education tells you that you need to learn to be a good Christian, and then that's what sparks your curiosity, and then you end up like me and leaving the church and ultimately deciding to be agnostic. Like it's it can have very different effects. Reading the same things, hearing the same messages, but we're all interpreting it differently. So I don't know that it necessarily that higher education makes that difference, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and go ahead, Veronica.
I was just going to say, just to clarify my previous statement, when the experience that I had where I was like living in the building, that was my elementary school and also my church growing up. Okay. It was actually at university when I started learning about how the Bible was constructed over the thousands of years that it was. That's when I was like, oh, this is actually contradictory to everything my church has ever taught me.
Gotcha.
So I just wanted to throw that out there. It was the higher education that actually like helped me kind of like, I guess.
It shook you around.
It helped me kind of like, start thinking critically. about that kind of stuff. I just wanted to clarify. I don't think I was clear earlier.
Oh no, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, it's, for me, it's fascinating because I feel like again, I don't think higher education is a problem. I think when you do have questions, how people respond to those questions will help shape kind of where you're going to end up when you do go through a deconstruction process. I mean, it's always the same thing where it's like, well, where's the dinosaurs in the Bible? And then, the response is either, or at least most responses from churches is, oh, well, there are no dinosaurs in the Bible because dinosaurs aren't real. And it's like, well, I'm looking at a freaking T-Rex skeleton in this museum. I'm seeing dinosaur bones. What do you mean they don't exist? Was this like created out of like plaster of Paris? Like what is this?
Like right up there with like flat Earth.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And or so there's certain things where it's like, and I feel like when you have higher education, it kind of helps you work through that. But even like, and I'll just say something practical. Like, I'm a big gamer. That's not a surprise to people, but I was playing, I hope not, but I remember for the Super Nintendo had Final Fantasy VI, and I love playing RPGs. And I was telling my friends about this awesome game and that you can like shoot fireballs and do magic. And I remember I had my youth leader tell me that what I was doing was wrong and sinful because I was conjuring evil spirits because I was playing a video game that had magic in it. And I remember crying. And I was crying. I went home after that Sunday and I was crying. And my dad was like, what's going on? Like, you could tell I was upset. And I said to him, I said, well, I was told that I have to get rid of my game that I just got for my birthday because I'm worshiping the devil. And my dad goes, wait, what? And I told what was said. He goes, let me ask you a question, Scott. Can you shoot fire out of your hands? And I go, no. He goes, when you play that game, do you get really angry and you feel like something's like evil's coming from you? I go, and I'm looking at my dad like he's the weirdest person in the world. Like, no, Dad, you're dummy. And he goes, well, then I think it's okay. You can play that game. I don't think you're conjuring any demons or anything. I think the game's fine. If you're playing something and you start feeling something or you start sensing something that's evil, then you might want to stop. But I don't think there's anything wrong with the game that you're playing. And he just left it at that. And it's like, oh. And I felt like if my dad would have went the opposite way and go, yeah, you need to get rid of that game. I didn't realize that magic. Oh, you're a Satan worshiper or whatever the case may be. And then I go to higher education and I find out, oh, all this denied myself all this stuff that was actually okay, but I was told it was not okay. It was going to probably have my trajectory was going to be a lot different because of how people handle when kids ask questions. You could either ignore it and say, don't ask such questions, which I think a lot of churches go that route, or you just say, well, you shouldn't think like that because that's bad thinking. And then you find out later, like, no, you're just denying, you just weren't equipped. A, they weren't equipped, or B, they just don't want to take the time to really answer some of the hard questions. And I think that's kind of a big thing when it comes to higher education. And I think even for me, not only my experience at a Christian university kind of helped shape things, but I would say probably one of the most influential things for me when it came to other cultures and other religions was being in the theater department and doing sound design for Stone Girls Dreaming. Like, that show probably did more shaping of how I view the world and how I view religion, and especially Christian or American Muslim relationships, and even maybe Christian Muslim relationships. Like, that whole show in itself, me working on that, probably did a lot more educating of me than me paying, to sit in a Bible class. And I think that's why, and I think sometimes, even with the, like I told everyone who's listening, I almost missed this Zoom interview because I was watching Turning Red with my kids, and just the controversy that was bringing out. And part of me goes, well, I understand why people are getting so bent out of shape, because art is powerful. And I think sometimes art can, I mean, how many people were, I mean, seriously, I mean, I remember being at Anderson and going to the theaters to watch Passion of the Christ. And I watched that and that moved me too much. Like I bought the film, but I've never watched it since. Like it's like one of those films I can only watch one time and I will never watch it again because it's just kind of it's one of those moments that you have to see it. But I can still have that same moment watching like Drive My Car and watching that and being moved to that, or watching Parasite or any other film. You know, there's certain things that you can learn. And I think sometimes art can be a great teacher, where can be a better teacher than a textbook and a scholar in some instances.
Yeah, there's a reason that the Greeks put the theaters next to their temples and the Romans put their theaters next to their political centers, because art is powerful.
Yeah. And even in the Middle Ages, where we start having the shows within the churches, or I can't remember what was, Veronica. Oh, Ron's going to kill me. I don't remember any of this stuff from art, from theater, history of theater and all that. Like I want to say like the Hall of Mirrors, where it was like you could like walk and look at the stained glass windows and it tells the story from creation to Jesus's ascension. And you can just like see that through the stained glass, or when they would have the carts that would go around during the festivals, and you can hear the story. It's like, oh, I want to see the creation story. Oh, I'm going to go see the hell one. Oh, I'm going here. Now I'm going to go see this one again. You know,
yeah, the morality plays.
The morality plays. Yeah. Thank you. That's why you got a good grade in that class, and I did it because I don't remember anything. So kind of to wrap up this whole thing, you know, where are you guys at now? Are you kind of feel like you're at the same place you are when you record this episode? Do you feel like you're kind of moving in one direction or the other direction? Do you feel like you found a foundation somewhere? Do you still feel like you're kind of floating and you're still kind of trying to figure things out and trying to figure out, you know, where you're going to put your feet at on this continuum of your faith journey? And Phil, I'll go ahead and start with you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I definitely had the foundation because, like I said, like when I started the deconstruction process, I was like, what is the foundational truth? And that is that, you know, God is all powerful and God is loving, and that he knows what he's doing. You know, it's everybody else that mucks it up. So yeah, like, I mean, I finally found a church, not a perfect church. I mean, as I'm sure that there are plenty of people that will point out all of its failings. But I have found a robust community of people who are living in faith and in love in a way that I have never seen before, you know? And I think that along with, you know, just being able to kind of connect to your smallest groups of influence as possible, like being able to live humbly and love others is the best way to kind of facilitate this deconstruction process. Because quite honestly, like if you're not deconstructing, like you're not growing, you know, because there has to be some dissonance, because without that there's no growth. I mean, the only way that that's not the case is, you know, on the other side of heaven, you know, when we have all the truth revealed to us, you know. And I think that I'm lucky in that sense, and I love talking about that. I'll talk about it all the time. But yeah, I think that I'm going more and more into my faith, which is something that I would have scoffed at as, you know, a teenager or a young adult. Now close to middle age, I'm really relishing the fact that I'm finally able to actually grow in a meaningful way.
Good. What about you, Britta?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Phil was saying, that if you're not deconstructing, you know, continually, you're really not growing. I will say that I feel since I reached, you know, it took me about 2.5 years to like land on agnosticism. And I feel like I've definitely started slowing down a lot more in my deconstruction, but definitely not stopped. And in that slow growth, I've been feeling a lot more peace with where I am, which was something that I struggled with during all my years in the church. I never really fully felt at peace with a lot of things. So right now it's just been, it's been a really slow growth, kind of relishing that peaceful, easy feeling that I've finally discovered. And then also dealing with the "you've been on my heart" messages from the standard the standard messages you get when you leave the church. So I've gotten an influx of those lately, and I don't know why. So
my heart goes out to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right, what about you, Veronica?
It's been kind of interesting because both of my parents are like experiencing like end of life stuff right now. And so they both have been like very concerned about the state of my soul the last couple of times that I have visited them. So it's, for the most part, the past 20 years that I've been deconstructing, I haven't really like been forced to like answer questions about it, if that makes sense. Like I as well kind of like landed ish on agnosticism slash Buddhism slash Wicca slash whatever. Kind of like the I don't know, and there's no way I can possibly ever know for sure. You know what I mean? Like that kind of a thing. And so sorry about that. That was my Alexa.
I thought it was my Alexa. That's why I looked behind me. I was like, what in the world was that?
Okay, short digression. We had some packages stolen, and so we installed one of those like Ring doorbell things that records it, and it's hooked up to our Alexa. So I apologize.
That's okay.
I totally forgot what I was saying. I'm so sorry.
No, I asked, kind of the idea, where do you find yourself? You feel like you're floating, landing. You said I'm trying to remember. You said something like, you kind of landed somewhere, but especially recently, you've been kind of asking yourself questions and kind of went from, and then that's when Alexa started talking. So
you jerk, it's rude to interrupt. Yeah, just that, for a long time I was kind of like, I can't know, I won't ever know, and I'll just like, I'll be floating, but I'll be okay with floating, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'll be okay with not ever really landing for sure. Lately I've been kind of more opening it back up, researching like different religions and stuff. I still don't think this one's the right one for me, but we'll find out.
Okay. All right. Good. Well, guys, again, thank you so much for sharing your stories when we did this back last fall. And then again, thank you for just kind of sharing where you're at now. This has been very good. And I think for people who are kind of want to know like, hey, what's going on with everybody? I think this is a great way to kind of see like, hey, deconstruction's not the end of everything. It's kind of the beginning. And it's kind of it's a journey. It's not a season. It's kind of a journey. It's a lifelong journey to kind of go through things. And there may be some seasons where you feel like you're kind of comfortable. Like here I am. I'm kind of comfortable with floating. And now it's like, well, now I'm starting to open things back up. Or, I was going here and now things have kind of slowed down and I'm kind of enjoying being here. And then there's like, Phil, where it's like, I could never imagine that where I'm at now to where I thought I was going to be when I was a kid or a young adult, that I didn't see this for me. And now I'm very excited with where I'm at now, where I feel like I'm really digging deep in my faith. So I think, your journeys are valid and they're beautiful. And I thank you. And thank you so much for sharing your journeys with me and for everybody who does listen to this podcast. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And guys, again, thank you so much for listening to the Scott Stedman podcast. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. And I will be definitely coming back with another episode next week. Again, I'm not sure what episode that is because I've been recording them ahead of time. I've actually been doing good and recording like a lot out. So I'm not sure when you will listen to this episode, but when you do, I hope it's able to help you with some of you who are going through a deconstruction journey, and hopefully you too can maybe find some peace of mind, whether you've landed or whether you are still in that transitional stage. Thank you so much for listening. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.